Okay, so we've done some breath meditation, we've done some walking meditation, and we've done some mettā meditation. And does anybody have any questions about that or about anything in general? Yeah.
What do you do if someone, it's not like if you don't have the feeling like someone's angry at you, basically, or if like someone has ill will towards you, how do you counter that? Do you just use mettā in the same way?
Yes, so the question was if somebody has ill will to you, then how do you counter that? Do you just use mettā? So basically it requires kind of, just off the top, it requires kind of two things. One is external and one is kind of internal. So externally, I mean, it depends what your relationship is to the person, depends what type of ill will they have towards you. So for example, is it just somebody who got a little annoyed at you, or is it somebody who's actively and maliciously, like trying to ruin your life? So if it's somebody who's actively trying to ruin a person's life, trying to harm one, then one has to take kind of appropriate steps, given the situation, to protect oneself. So most of the time, if it's just somebody who's like angry at you or treating somebody badly, then usually the only thing that needs to be done is to not get angry with that person, spread thoughts of goodwill to them, and just not engage with them. It's kind of often the most powerful tool in the repertoire. And if somebody gets very angry and you don't respond in anger, and depending on the relationship you have with them, if they're actively trying to harm you or they're just kind of, you actually don't have to talk to them, That's kind of an option. It doesn't mean like you cut them off from your life, but it's like turning the dial, right? And instead of having the dial at 100, like I'm engaging all the time, you can, cut it back to 75 for a bit. And then if things change up, you can turn it back to 100. That's one thing. If it's just this kind of normal thing. If it's somebody who's physically trying to harm you or doing something very badly, okay, then sometimes those situations require more like drastic measures. Not drastic in terms of, whipping out a bazooka or something like that, but it requires sometimes an active role, like actively you have to stop a person. So one thing people actually don't know about monks, actually some people do, as a monk you often get stopped on the street and people think you know Kung Fu, which is, I think, I am at least pretty grateful that, I think it's nice that most people think monks know Kung Fu, because you can walk any, you're kind of no problem, you just walk, people think you know Kung Fu, then, oh, I'm not messing with him, But one of the things that some people don't know about monks is that the Buddha actually laid down this rule where you're not allowed to strike a person out of anger, but you can strike or harm a person desiring escape. So in other words, if somebody is trying to kill a monk, you can seriously injure them, so long as you don't have the intention to kill them. Like you could really injure them, like in very harsh ways to save your own life. But of course, this is another thing that requires the turning of the dial. I'm not saying, but this is one of the things that the Buddha laid down for his monks. There's this ability to protect yourself to a certain degree. So sometimes these kind of situations where if it's not just verbal, if it's physical, usually it requires, if it's terrible, it might have to call the police, might have to, just leave right away, whatever it might be. It depends a lot on the situation. So in all these external situations, there's this turning of the dial. This is why in our relationships, this practice of mettā doesn't mean we lose wisdom. We always have to have this wisdom to whatever is appropriate for the situation, we set the dial to that. If it's appropriate, somebody's malicious towards us, for us just to back away a bit. Sometimes we can just give the Thai smile, or this is the word that I heard, the Thai smile, where it's just like, okay, okay, and then just don't say anything. Sometimes teachers in situations where if a student is angry, they'll get angry back. Okay, but then if you see them with people who aren't their students, they don't get angry. Okay, you learn this very quickly as a monk that if you step out of bounds then with a teacher, then they can be very ferocious, very frightening. So in other words, there's this huge variety of factors that go into human relationships, and in our external dealings with people who are angry or hateful towards us, we have to have this ability to turn the knob, to set the dial in a way that's appropriate to that specific situation. So that's the external side. But on the internal side is kind of much simpler in a way. And basically, whoever we're dealing with, we try to have this attitude of goodwill towards them. Okay, pervading them with a mind of goodwill, we pervade all beings with a mind of goodwill, no matter what that person's intentions are towards us, and we wish them well. Okay, so that basically has a two-pronged effect. On one hand, there's the external situation that needs to be dealt with, but also a lot of our suffering comes internally. Okay, there's this internal aspect to the suffering that we feel when somebody is hateful towards us. And oftentimes, that suffering comes from our own hatred. Yeah? It's like somebody who, somebody came and wanted to throw like a hot coal at one person, right? And so, to get back at them, you pick up the same hot coal and chuck it back at them. Well, you get burned first, and worse. Like that might only touch them for a bit, but that anger stays in a person's system for a long time. So for that reason, on the internal level, to deal with those kind of things, one always tries to cultivate this attitude of mettā, or goodwill. And one has to kind of be careful because this attitude of hatred sneaks in all these ways that seem really reasonable, Can sneak in under the guise of reasonable political views, can sneak in under the guise of reasonable self-defense, can sneak in under the guise of reasonable, whatever it is. Usually there's a really good reason that people start to get angry. And it can be like this thin end of the wedge. In other words, you don't start to notice it at first, then you keep going down that path, it gets wider and wider and wider, till at the end it's full-blown anger. So in this way, with these kind of situations, there's this two-pronged approach. On the internal level, we have this attitude of mettā. On the external level, we try to learn to be skillful, to use wisdom, as well as mettā, to respond in a way that's appropriate for the circumstances specific to that situation. Yeah. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
When doing mettā practice, I find it helpful to think of people that I know first, spend loving kindness to them, and then work my way out to people I know less well, and then people that I don't necessarily like. Is that an appropriate way of doing a mettā practice?
Yeah, so the question was, can you start with people spreading mettā you really like and then move around to people you are neutral to maybe, I guess, and then people you don't like at all? And yeah, that's one way to do it. I mean, there's no, the Buddha doesn't lay down necessarily for meditation techniques like a fixed method that you have to do, So, I mean, we have a goal in mind, which is to be able to spread thoughts of goodwill to all beings. And then this is where meditation often has this element of creativity. So that's an appropriate way, I think, at least in my opinion, to use creativity. But what the Buddha lays down are these kind of methods. It's kind of like, or not methods, but topics. And our creativity should stay within the range of that topic. It's like, the 401 has the, express collectors, but it's got rails, right? And so, if you want to go, you can switch lanes, a lot of different roads you can take, but, we don't want to drive off the road, like over the rail and, into the Rouge Valley. So in the same way, so long as we have the goal in mind that we're trying to learn to spread this unlimited thoughts of goodwill to all beings, we can be creative in our application of mettā. But we don't want to go outside the bounds of mettā too much for that. So in other words, there's all kinds of different things a person can focus their mind on, and it's better to stay with mettā in general to eliminate hatred. Yeah. Maybe not getting so much, okay, maybe if I just think about the backstory enough, then, you're just sticking with that topic. Yeah. Question?
For meditation, I find my mind easily getting distracted. So is there anything else you can do to keep focused on meditation besides just breathing in and out and concentrating on breathing?
So question was, mind can, paraphrasing, mind can become easily distracted. So is there anything else that one can do besides just the breath meditation to eliminate that? And yeah, there is. I mean, there's many topics of meditation. So one of the interesting things about people is that people have these different characteristics. So not everybody is the same. It's kind of like, I think in Ayurvedic medicine, they have, these different, like they got the sattva and the pitta and tabab. The other one I don't know. Kapha? I almost mumbled it right. So, but they have those three types. And then there's certain types of food that are good for each of those people. And so one person like sour foods is good. Another person sweet foods is good for that person's makeup. And in the same way with our minds, it's not the case that for everybody, every topic of meditation will be equally suitable or equally effective. So if our mind doesn't settle easily on one topic of meditation, then one of the problems could be that it's not the right one for us. It's not the right counter to our defilements. It's like, we use that kind of example of stomach acid. So if somebody has stomach acid, the right thing for them to eat is alkaline. But if somebody has a stomach that's too alkaline, the right thing for them to eat is acid. Right? So if we have a stomach that's acidic and we eat acid, then that, although it's a medicine, it can damage us, or not damage us, but it won't be as effective. So in the same way, there can be kind of topics of meditation that we can carry, we can practice in such a way that they go beyond a tipping point to being unbeneficial, or they may just not be something that our mind easily settles on. So if that's the case, then this is why our meditation practice requires us to have this attitude of experimentation. It's kind of like, a carpenter gets to learn, maybe samples the different tools, learns how to use them each a bit, but eventually, they get used to doing things a certain way that works well for them. And so in the same way, if one thing isn't working for us, we can try out some of the different topics of meditation, and see if, this one is really feeling like it's the right one, it's the right way for me to proceed, So if that's the case, we notice with a particular topic our defilements are diminishing, our focus is more easily settled on that topic, then we can take that topic up for our main meditation topic and use other ones as subsidiaries. That's one thing. The other thing is that breath meditation doesn't just have to be in and out. So what a lot of kind of people recommend for meditation is that we have to have this attitude of playing. Kind of like, a kid. You see a kid with a kind of like a block of wood, right? Okay, you that block of wood to an adult, that's a block of wood right there. But to a kid, that block of wood, they turn it this way, it's a skyscraper, right? All of a sudden, they put it over a little dip and it's a bridge, They kind of have all these ways that they approach that block of wood. And in the same way, or a similar means, we can have this attitude of learning to play with our meditation practice. In other words, within the bounds that the Buddha sets for something like breath meditation, there's a lot of ways to conceive the breath. And so if we just think of it as coming in and out of our nose, in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out, that's one perception. But we can think of the breath as if we're breathing in and out through the whole body. We can change our conception of the breath so that it's energy that's maybe both outside the body and inside. And it's possible to pull it to different areas of the body. Then we can conceive of the breath as an energy in the body. We can look for blockages in the body. Where is the body blocked? How is the body not responding well to the breath? And if that's the case, we can change the way that we breathe. Try to make the breath more subtle. Try to use imagination. Imagine it like becoming very fine maybe and kind of working its way through any tension in the body. And kind of doing this, our mind can become more absorbed in our meditation topic, almost like we're playing, having a good kind of play, doing this kind of thing. And so with that in mind, that's when we actually learn to develop meditation as a skill. Right? Because if it's just a kind of, okay, in, out, I mean, there's something to that, right? I mean, we're trying to do it. But the mind, each time we sit down to meditate, is a little different. So what a child learns to do when they're playing is actually they learn to manipulate objects in a large variety of situations. What they're actually learning about is cause and effect. That might be why that's built into humans, evolutionary, to play. So the same way we learn to play with our meditation topic, we learn ways to make the mind settle down when the mind is in these different moods, when the mind is in these different situations. And if we learn about different topics of meditation, not like hopping here and there aimlessly, but deliberately, okay, is this one suitable for me? Then if the mind is in different moods, it's like learning different medicines to calm the mind, to relax the mind, to counter the mind. So those are a couple different ways that a person can, maybe try out to get more interested in their meditation, to stay with it a bit more, and to have its progress become a bit more interesting, right? Kind of learning about cause and effect. Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm meditating, I'll notice like tension in my chest or something, like especially when I'm walking for some reason, but I don't really know how to make it because I just want to kind of relax and dissipate, but I don't know. Nothing I seem to do makes a difference. So I don't know if you have any advice about that.
Yeah, so the question was, often kind of like a tension in the chest when meditating. So, it's one of those things that a person kind of has to investigate, because tensions in the body can come from a lot of different sources. So, when we try to relax the area around it when we're doing meditation, that's kind of a subtle way to do. And if we keep doing that, then it can kind of break through that. And if if it comes from another source, then it can slowly dissipate that source. And I was kind of trying to think of an example here, like say for example you have it's hard to think here. Say for example you have I don't know. Well, we were on the topic of acid. Let's just imagine we've got a kind of pool of acid. Just for kind of joking around sake. And it kind of leaks out, and goes. And if we kind of, just imagining as well that this is a kind of pool and everything's equal, if we pour alkaline into the area where the leak is, say this area over here, the pool's over here, it's possible that if we pour enough, it eventually leaks back to the pool and neutralizes the pool. And in the same way, these kind of tensions that we feel in our body, they can sometimes have sources that seem totally unrelated to the place where the tension is. So doing these kind of subtle meditation techniques, okay, imagining the breath working through it, imagining these various things, that can sometimes eventually, over time, release whatever the underlying cause of that tension is. So there was a teacher who I really respect, and he was saying he always had this tension in his foot, I think, when he was meditating. And finally, one day, he'd always be working around with it, trying to make the body calm, I think. And finally, one day, that tension broke in his foot, after a long time. And then this memory came up. This kind of vision in his mind came up of when he was young, jumping out of the top, they have those kind of barn, if you've ever seen a barn, they've got this kind of usually window at the top to push hay through. And then they push the hay into this kind of area at the bottom. And he jumped, I think, out of this window at the top into the hay at the bottom as a kid, and a nail went through his foot all the way through. So he'd been carrying that kind of tension around for so long. His kind of body had just hardened around it. But eventually, over time, it relaxed. Now, there's a kind of another case of a monk who basically decided that, you have this meditation-friendly leg, meditation-unfriendly leg. I don't know if anybody's ever noticed that. Kind of one leg tends to be easy to meditate with, another one is hard. Anyways, this one monk, when he first started meditating, decided, I'm going to meditate with my unfriendly meditation leg and get good at that first. But then later on, you know, in his monastic career, he kind of noticed that he was always having problems with terrible tension in his meditation. And what it turned out, it ended up happening was using that leg, it kind of twisted his body in the wrong kind of position. And when it gets twisted that way, like when you meditate and you get more flexible, your bones shift. Maybe they kind of rotate a bit more easily. And then because this was not a good position for your body actually has this kind of fascia. It's kind of like membrane system. And it hardens up around things. So that fascia in his body may be hardened up or something like that. But he got all this tension. His body became very hard. And so for him, the solution was to start sitting with his other meditation leg. Yeah? So in other words, you know, after doing that for years, right? Probably that became possible. I think that, you know, that became maybe the most accustomed position for him to sit in. So in other words, these patterns of tension in our body can have a whole lot of different sources to them. And so what it requires, again, is this investigation. Yeah? If it's a problem, then always when we're meditating, we try to do things to relax it. But it might require something else too. In that monk's case, okay, changing to your good meditation leg instead of always sitting with the bad one. Right? Or, you know, if it's some bad injury, then, you know, maybe a little yoga might pull on the right area. So again, one of those things that requires a bit of wisdom. Yeah. Okay, so any other questions? Yeah.
So if mettā is such an important tool, I consider it like a tool, where in the eightfold path does it fall under? Or does it even?
Yes, I mean there's basically 40 topics of meditation. Typically they tend to, not always, go under, I mean, you know, it's hard to categorize these things sometimes, but, you know, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So they tend to go under those. Also, right view is involved here because you have the view, say that like I'm not trying to become super lovey-dovey with everybody, like literally, you know, snuggle up to a snake or something, or somebody practices mettā and go snuggles a snake or a scorpion. That's right view. There's also right intention. And a right intention is the intention for non-ill will and non-harming, also renunciation. All those three elements are present in mettā as well. So you have non-ill will, and kind of, you know, don't want to be hating anybody. Also non-harming, that usually comes under compassion, but it's also there in goodwill. In other words, we don't want to cultivate this attitude where we're like laughing at people's misfortunes. Yeah, that's what most humor is. You know, something really terrible happens to somebody and it's a knee slapper, right? So we want to eliminate this attitude of harming. It also, mettā has this element of renunciation in it, because we're renouncing part of our attachment to beings as well, in order, instead of having love for them, to have goodwill for them. Yeah? And we're going to have this attachment to these beings, like this is mine. We learn to spread mettā, it takes us back a step. Because now, instead of us controlling that being, we recognize they've got the freedom to act how they want. So really, we can only go halfway. If they meet us halfway, it's all good. But they have that option. So mentally, it's a step back. Of course, in reality, that's always the way it is, right? Whether we grab onto somebody or not, they can always do what they want. But mentally, it's a step back. It's a renunciation in a sense. Because it comes with this recognition that all beings are the owners of their actions. So although I wish you well, although I want you to do well, although I might try to point the way for you to do well in various ways that might seem good, try to help you in various ways that might seem good, if you don't do it, then there's nothing I can do. And I'll pull myself back enough so that I won't suffer from that. So it comes into play in many of these different elements of the Noble Eightfold Path. These things don't always necessarily graph in an exact linear fashion. You know? Yeah. Okay,